This is an exclusive presentation of WOWO 1190 AM and 107.5 FM, Unholstered.
Welcome back. It is time for another edition of Unholstered. My name is Kayla Blakesley, and I'm alongside my co-host.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Sophia Rosales-Katina. I am a captain with the Fort Wayne Police Department, and welcome once again to Unholstered.
We've been hanging out with you on the weekends for quite some time now here on Unholstered. And if this is your first time tuning in, this is the show all about your local media department, which is me, teaming up with our Fort Wayne Police Department here in Fort Wayne to share and tell all of the stories that don't often get told when it comes to law enforcement. And not just on behalf of the Fort Wayne Police Department, but really law enforcement agencies all across the country. And I think it's about time, Sophia, we disclose something that I didn't realize was happening until as of late. But a lot of people think we're hosting this show live.
I know they do. And I guess I just assumed that people understood we weren't.
Yes, I kind of understood that too. But full disclosure, Sophia and I do not host this show live. We'd love to.
Yes, absolutely. One day.
One day. But because a lot of our guests are members of our Fort Wayne Police Department, they can't be available Saturday mornings. So we pre-tape the show whenever we can get our guests' availability. And I say all this to say, Sophia, you and I received a lot of criticism over the weekend, over the past couple of days,
right?
Because last Saturday we weren't talking about the mass shooting in Uvalde, and we were talking about what I still think was some important topics of conversation. We were talking about mental health, as May was Mental Health Awareness Month. I thought it was still a really important issue. However, a lot of people wanted to hear from us talking about Uvalde. So that goes back to my comment of, no, this show is not live. Had Sophia and I been live last weekend, we probably absolutely would have been talking about the mass shooting at the elementary school there in Texas, but we weren't live. So we're getting to it this week. I don't even think I need to recap the story for all of you. You know exactly what's happened in Texas. And it's just absolutely horrifying. And Sophia, I reached out to you, less than an hour ago. Said, hey, can you come down to the studio? Because we need to talk about this.
Yes.
Here's where I'm at with it. And I just want to get this out there right out of the gate, because there's been all of this talk, and there has been for years. There's this movement, the see something, say something movement. And while I completely agree with that, I struggle with that a little bit, because there's a lot of people talking about see something, say something, moving forward from this shooting. And that movement's always bothered me a little bit, because in the case of today's world, unfortunately, I think a lot of it's due to social media, but see something, say something. And I don't know if this is a bad example, but it's the one I'm going to use just to get my point across. I am a white, young female. I'm in my 30s. If I'm outside the school picking up my kiddo from school and I see, let's say, a black male carrying a firearm outside of my daughter's school, see something, say something. Let's say I report that because this looks a little odd to me, a little bit suspicious. I feel like in that scenario, this happens a lot. All of a sudden you're labeled the racist for calling it in. I feel like in the see something, say something mentality movement that we have today, you actually say something and you are labeled the racist or the homophobe or the bigot or something else, whatever's trendy that day to be labeled. That happens a lot. And so I don't know if people are seeing something, if they're saying anything.
It's difficult, and I get where they're coming from, but it should never deter you from doing the right thing. And in that case, it would be a call to 911. Hey, there's someone out here. We need a full description. Because to keep that from being just us randomly just start stopping people, I want to be specific of who I'm looking for. So clothing description, male black, male white, short hair, long hair, female black, female white, Hispanic, Asian. We need to know those details. I think the more details we have, I think the less it comes across as, hey, this is a racial issue, and more of a, this isn't right. Mm-hmm. And we have to go with our guts. I'm going to make a lot of viewers angry or listeners angry, but women have an intuition. Mm-hmm. Whether men want to believe it or not, we have an intuition, and we have to start relying on the intuition. And men have it too. They're just more, I think, because they're in that role of the protector, they think less about it. But as women, we're always looking. We can sense creep a mile away. And I think we need to start going back to just calling on that. If you're seeing it, someone else is seeing it too. And if we're getting 2, 3, 4, 5 calls, we're going out there, and we're going to get out there with expediency.
How does that work? Let's say I saw something and I said something and I picked up the phone and called 911. Let's say I'm the only person that is called about this male outside of school with a firearm. What's the protocol? How does that work?
So it would probably go in as a suspicious person armed. We would send someone out. Now, that doesn't necessarily, but we have to know what he's being suspicious about. So being close to that school armed, I would think that would heighten the suspicion. We would send someone out to check. Now, we've got to be very careful, though, because there are constitutional rights people have. And just because you're carrying a gun, doesn't mean we can stop you, ask you for ID or anything like that. Now, being around the school, maybe you're wearing a long, puffy coat in the middle of summer. I mean, there has to be things we can articulate that would make that a suspicious thing. So we have to be very careful as well. So the more information we get, the better off we are. Now, someone just says, hey, there's this white guy with a white T-shirt and blue jeans walking around with a gun. There's not much we're going to do with that. Now, obviously, with around, are they in a school? Are they looking in windows? Are they pacing back and forth? Do they look like they're in some kind of crisis? There's all these information things that we put together to make the bigger picture.
You know Michael Joyner.
Yes.
Obviously, you know Mike well. He was the public information officer for the Fort Wayne Police Department prior to you taking over the role, right? Mm-hmm. And back in the day, oh gosh, this must have been 7-8 years ago. I leave for work during my day job about 3:30 in the morning. And at the time, we didn't have a garage, so we parked outside along the street. So I'm always very cognizant of my surroundings. And we had an elderly neighbor, a woman that we knew well. And one morning, I'm going to my car, and at the same time, I'm seeing what I thought was a male running from her home in full-on winter coat, jeans, and a ski mask. And so I immediately, in my phone, started jotting down what I could make out of this person. He had white sneakers on, blue jeans, the full nine. I tried to write out the best description I get, and I called up Joyner. And it's like 3:30 in the morning. But I'm like, I don't know what else to do. I don't know if he just robbed my neighbor, or he broke into my neighbor's home. I have no, and he's running. He is physically running from her home. Scared the daylights out of me. Called Joyner, woke him up. They sent someone out, knocked on her door. Long story short, it was the mailman. And it was cold that time of year. There wasn't snow.
At 3:30 in the morning?
At 3:30 in the morning, delivering mail is what it came to. And I thought that was strange. I leave at work for the same time every morning and never saw the mailman. He was highly offended, that I called in. That's, again, going back to my see something, say something mentality, how you can get labeled certain things for doing so. But I said to Joyner, and I even apologized to Joyner, I go, I'm so sorry for waking you up so early. I'm sorry for any friction with this gentleman, which I'm like, now he knows the neighbor next door called. And Joyner said, no, Kayla. Anytime, just like what you said, anytime you think something is out of the normal, he was like, I don't care if it's 2 in the morning, 3 in the morning, 7 p.m. at night, you call. Yeah. You make the call.
But I will say, though, that's a misstep. And if seconds count, you calling him, then he has to make the call. And and did you lose something in translation with him? Did he catch it all because you just woke him up and now he's got to call in? So seconds matter. Yeah. I mean, we're already behind the 8 ball because we're probably not right on top of the situation, although sometimes we may be, but seconds matter sometimes. And I know if I was that neighbor of yours, I'd be happy that you called and were looking out.
She actually ended up baking us cookies and brought them over to the house.
For me, I would think that's a good neighbor. Yeah. And it would be suspicious. Even for me as a police officer, I see at 3 o'clock in the morning, mail, I've never, ever heard of that.
Yeah.
Ever.
Me neither.
So that would be suspicious for me.
I'm still not sure really I can only be told so much, I'm sure.
Yeah. No, I think that's a good neighbor, that you were a good neighbor.
But you bring a good point. Seconds matter in that scenario. Yeah.
And we have people do that all the time, not just with suspicious, but we have people call like their mom when they're involved in a domestic and telling her instead of calling us. And sometimes maybe that's just a point so no one sees that they're calling the police. I get that. But sometimes we get that a lot, the second, third party calls when it should be directly to us.
In the case of Uvalde, and I know we can't really talk specifics yet, Sophia, because
there's so much that I don't know. And at the surface, I'll come out right now. It looks bad on the police's part. It really does. Yeah. I will admit that at this point. I don't know all the info, but what's coming out and some of the stuff I've heard, it looks bad.
Well, in this case, it does seem like things were said, and there were some social media posts on behalf of the shooter. He wrote on social media, posted pictures of his guns saying, the kids should be aware, watch out for the kids. Just some really strange stuff. There were some red flags, and I'm not asking you to weigh in on what happened or didn't happen, because I know you can't. I can't. No one really can yet. We got the DOJ launching a whole investigation right now. We're all still trying to figure out what happened. But can you walk us through maybe protocols different from department to department? I don't know. It is. Okay, so it is. Yes. So the first thing we just learned. Yeah. Can you walk us through a active shooter situation? How it's supposed to go, at least maybe in our neck of the woods?
Yes. So in our department, we've been training active shooter for a very long time. We had Lieutenant Zelt, who was on with our SWAT team,
Yes.
Columbine. As soon as that happened, SWAT team started training. Kevin Zelt started training. He started studying, and he is like methodical. He's been an excellent trainer and presenter to us. So we've been training and getting presentations on active shooter for a very long time, since a little bit after Columbine, once they could put pieces together. And here in our city, we are very fortunate. We are very fortunate to have a community that's behind us, that supports us, and that funds us properly.
That's a big one.
Yes, it's huge. Not all departments have that luxury. These smaller departments, rural departments, Uvalde is one of them because I think their whole town is about 20,000 people. So their department is not going to be huge. So I'm assuming that their training budget is not huge. And I've heard lots of stuff, little snipes on social media about police being highly armed and highly trained. I'm like, I would hope so. And fortunately for us here in Fort Wayne, we are. But these smaller rural departments or smaller suburb departments are not necessarily so. And that's a problem. The defund the police movement only exacerbated that problem because now even more funding kind of got cut from some of these places. Even with a touchy subject around here, but the constitutional carry law that passed. So some of these fees that departments charged for the license were used for training ammunition, for training purposes. And now you've just undercut all that. So now that budget's gone for some of these smaller departments. We never relied on that, but some of these smaller departments did. So it's going to come back to training. It's going to come back to that. But getting back to what we do here, like I said, we've been training for several years. We've had a couple instances where we've used that training, and our officers have been just amazing. I'll just say it. They were amazing. We had what came in as an active shooter call at the beauty college. I think it was Ravenscroft.
Yeah, I remember.
A couple years ago. We actually, during one of our trainings, our department-wide training, we watched film on that because the school had video throughout the school. So we could see when our officers arrived immediately what they did. They formed up, they went in as a group, just like they were trained. It was, I just right now I got goosebumps just because I'm recalling that video. And one of my good friends was the tip of the spear on that. So I was really proud of her. Wow. But you could see them moving through methodically, going through that building to try and, number one, find the active shooter. Number two, locate victims, call them in, because we also have a trained fire personnel that will be escorted in with officers for victim rescue if that needs to happen. So like I said, there's so many levels of training that comes onto that. And I'm just, like I said, I've said this on the show before, I am so fortunate to work in a department that cares about its community.
I've got so many thoughts, Sophia.
There's so many stuff I want to get out here too, and we got 27 minutes.
I guess my first thought is, you mentioned that tip of the spear, and a friend of yours being at the tip of the spear for this particular situation. I feel like when it comes, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. In fact, I'd love you to correct me if I am wrong. As a civilian, as someone who knows you, I know a lot of members that serve on our police department, also our county department, and as a member of law enforcement, as a first responder, as a member in our military, I have this expectation of you that you are willing to put any other person's life above your own, whether that be a criminal, a drug dealer, or a child. You're willing to put their life above your own. And so when you are that tip of the spear, if you will, when you're going in first, I mean, that's your mentality, right? That's my expectation of you, because let's be honest, if you're the first one to approach a gunman, the odds of you getting shot are probably far greater.
Right. But I also have protective gear as well.
I bring it up because, and I know everyone's probably heard this clip from Uvalde. You've got the police, allegedly they were in the hallway for quite some time before actually entering in classrooms and really doing their thing to find this gunman. And you had one of the police officers say, "We were afraid of getting shot."
At that point, if they proceeded any further, not knowing where this suspect was at, they could have been shot, they could have been killed. And at that point, that gunman would have the opportunity to kill other people inside that school.
That didn't sit well with me, Sophia, because I do have this expectation of you guys that you're putting everyone else's lives above your own. And that doesn't seem like that's how it played out.
It doesn't sound like that quote was probably the best thing that should have come out of anyone's mouth, even if you thought it. Because, I don't want to get shot. Sure. I mean, I'm a human being.
Sure.
I don't want to die.
But is that a fair expectation of me to have of you?
Maybe. It depends on the situation. I don't want to run into my death.
Yeah.
I don't want to. Sometimes
do
as an officer, sometimes you have to get there. You have to assess the situation. Like, what do I have? And do I have, is this a tactical situation that I can possibly win? Because if I go down and I'm the only one there, then what? Or if I get hurt, now someone's got to come in and rescue me on top of handling the situation. And so there's just a lot of things at play. And it's never like the movies. And I just want to caution people, that an officer's going to make that shot every single time. And in this case, someone did, was great. But there were several people. Not everyone has that level of ability in marksmanship, especially under pressure. The Navy SEALs say under pressure, you don't rise to the occasion, you sink to your level of training. If you don't have training, you're not going to know what to do. You're going to sit there, you're going to twiddle your thumbs, you're not going to know what to do. You're going to be waiting for direction. And if you don't have someone there that has a good, solid foundation about what to do and how to do it, nothing's going to get done.
And you kind of made the point already in a smaller town like Uvalde.
They may not have the training that we have as a larger department. So I'm not going to criticize anybody at this point. I need more information.
Yeah.
I don't like to jump on this bandwagon of denigrating people. If there's something that needs to come out of this horrible situation, I don't understand the evil in people's minds sometimes, but as an officer, I am tasked. That is my job. Mm-hmm. I am supposed to go in and stop the threat. And there is a difference between active shooter and barricaded subject. Sometimes an active shooter situation turns into a barricaded armed suspect, and they're handled at a completely different operational level. So I don't know at what point did that stop. So those are the minor things that before I beat a department up, I need to know. Because what starts out as active doesn't remain active. They could run out of ammunition or we don't know, or they could set booby traps. We don't know. Mm-hmm. I mean, in case of Columbine, if you remember that, they had set up booby traps with propane tanks and things. So we've got to be prepared for that, because we could take out a whole department, especially the size of Uvalde, and now what? Now we have to wait for other resources to come in. So there's just so many things that are unanswered for me right now. But at the surface, I don't like what I'm seeing.
How do you feel about there's all these calls, and I do not want to get political. Let me make that very clear. But obviously, you're a 2A supporter. You have one on your hip right now.
Yeah.
How do you feel about guns being the focal point of blame for what happened?
I'm just never a proponent of that. I'm not. We've had on the show, and I totally agree. It's an inanimate object. Mm-hmm. It doesn't. It's not going to shoot anybody here on my hip until I pick it up and pull the trigger. I think we have to start having a real conversation about mental health in this country.
Amen.
And I think the bottom line, that's where we lie. You're never going to legislate evil out of people. Mm-hmm. They will find if they
that
don't
should
have
be on a bumper sticker. You're never going to legislate evil out of people.
And you're never going to stop someone whose intent is to kill people. Mm-hmm. They may run out of ammo, but they've got knives. They've got booby traps.
Yeah. Molotov cocktails.
And you can just get on the internet and look all this stuff up and learn how to make this stuff. It's not like it's not hard to find. Like I said, sometimes the biggest people screaming are the ones that are the most heavily protected. Mm-hmm. I mean, I always see like people in Hollywood screaming about, guns and guns. Meanwhile, the Emmys and the Grammys and all those are the most heavily protected shows on earth. They hire off-duty police officers. They have their own security. Who are what? They're armed. Mm-hmm. Because what are you afraid of? Mm-hmm. So those are that kind of stuff really kind of starts to annoy me after a while. And then, they're screaming at police, and we're just trying to do the right thing. We're human beings trying to do the right thing. And sometimes, we don't always do it.
When it comes to mass shootings, do you feel like the defund the police movement has changed protocol a little bit? And I'm not even in terms of funding that departments are actually getting, because we kind of already touched on that.
Yeah.
But this mentality of, you just said, we're trying to do the right thing, but it does seem like even in a case of an active shooter, when you try to do the right thing, it still always comes back on you if the active shooter isn't actually present. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. And oh my gosh, I remember this one time at the mall, we got this call about an active shooter, and we went in right. We went in heavy, and people formulated. We had all sorts of Allen County, ISP, state police. We had Purdue University. Everybody showed up at the mall because we had this report of an active shooter. We went in heavy, we went in right. And we got blasted on the comments on social media about overreaction. And I'm like, so what do you want? Do you want us to go in and do what we need to do, and then you're going to chastise us? And then I said, I read a quote on the internet, and I said, this is perfect. I was like, if you walk on eggshells long enough, after a while, you're not going to make a sound. Yep. And that's where we're at right now. I feel like that's where we're going. And we've chastised officers for doing and trying to do their best. And sometimes, they make mistakes, and sometimes they're wrong. And if they're prosecuted and need to be prosecuted, then prosecute them. But don't denigrate an entire profession because someone somewhere screwed up. We don't do that with anyone else. And we don't run video after video after video after video after video.
Soundbite after soundbite after soundbite.
Yeah, ad nauseum. Every profession has its people that shouldn't be in it. And policing is no different. And you've got to, once you identify who those are, then you have to make the steps to get rid of them.
Let me read this tweet to you.
Oh, boy.
That came across my Twitter feed.
Oh, boy.
Full disclosure, she didn't know I was going to read this.
No, I didn't.
It says, if a surgeon makes a mistake that results in death, they can be sued. If a truck driver makes a mistake, crashes, and causes a death, they can be sued. But when a police officer makes a mistake that results in kids dying, they're immune. End qualified immunity. Can you start by telling folks what qualified immunity is for those who don't know? And then I would love to hear your response to that tweet.
So I think people hear this, that police officers can't be sued, and they run with this idea that they can't. And that's not true. It's not true. There are certain protections that officers do have, yes. When they're acting under the color law and there's a reasonable standard set by the courts, reasonableness standard set by the courts, that's what we fall back on. If a reasonable officer would have acted in the same way, then you're covered. What it doesn't cover is malicious or completely unreasonable actions by a police officer. So it doesn't happen often because oftentimes it's what we do isn't unreasonable. It may be like shocking to some people.
Sure.
But violence is never calm. It's never nice. It's never wrapped up in a bow like television.
Peaceful.
Yeah, it's not peaceful. Violence is violence, and there have to be people willing to take that violence on for you. But qualified immunity is in a lot of things. Prosecutors enjoy it. Judges enjoy it. Politicians enjoy it. I don't know why it is it's always the police, because I don't legislate. I only try to...
You don't make the laws.
No, I don't. And but I've got to act because that's my job as an officer. Whether you like that law or not, especially when it comes to guns, a lot of people don't like red flag laws and the constitutional carry. But as an officer, I'm the one that's charged with making sure those are enforced. So your fight isn't with me. Now you may not like the way I handle it, but this is how I'm trained to do it, and this is what I do. But as a government worker, I think you have to afford police a little bit because who's going to want to do this job? And you may not ever need me, but I tell you that one time you do, you're going to hope I show up. And if no one's going to be there because no one wants to do this, because every single time I turn around, I'm getting sued, because that's what happens. It happens now. There's tort claims that come left and right on police officers. And we do get sued. Our city gets sued. Doesn't mean they settle all the time. Doesn't mean they don't fight it. Doesn't mean people just go away because they know they're not going to win. But it happens. And sometimes officers don't even know things happen. Things just get settled and they don't even know about it. A lot of times it's like, we breached a door and then we're getting sued because we breached this door trying to get their loved one who'd fallen down, and I can see they clearly can't get up. And so I kicked the door in, and now I'm getting sued because I made entry.
No kidding.
It doesn't happen all the time, but sometimes it does. People are so quick to jump on this immunity thing. Like, I enjoy and I can wreak havoc like Godzilla on a small town and nothing can happen to me. I'm immune. It's not true. It's simply not true. And you really need to educate yourself before you kind of talk about things like that, because it's just not true.
Well, that's my favorite part. You usually hear end qualified immunity from people who, it's not like they're law enforcement. It's always people chirping in the cheap seats. that want to make comments.
Those cheap seats are filled.
They're filled and they are loud.
Sold out.
Let me tell you what. Moving forward from Uvalde, what can we take away? What can we learn? What can we do? I mean, I feel like on one hand, we've talked about the defund the police rhetoric a lot, and you bring up such a good point. Yes, our Fort Wayne Police Department here, really well funded. We're really well equipped. We have a lot of what other departments don't have. We're actually really lucky here in Fort Wayne. I hope people realize that.
Yes.
But you bring up Uvalde, such a small town, population like 20,000, less than?
I believe they're 20,000. So the actual township of Aboit is larger than the city of Uvalde.
Yeah, so they don't have what we have. I think this is just further evidence that this defund the police movement, that rhetoric needs to end.
It does. And training is such a vital part of our job, and understand it's not just you have to be proficient in active shooter. You have to be proficient in mental health and de-escalation and domestic violence. There's so many things an officer has to be aware of and trained on, because laws change every July 1st. Mm-hmm. Every July 1st, there's something new coming out from our state legislature that we need to be aware of. We need to be trained on. We need to be, given briefs about, hey, this is how the law's changing. This is how it's going to affect. We have to remember all that thing in the split second of a moment of every single call that we're on. And we have to remember the Constitution, and we have to remember that, where to aim and how to handle this rifle that we've been given for these active shooter situations. Every patrol officer has the ability to have an AR-15 model of gun in their car, along with a shotgun. We have less lethal ammunition. We have tasers. We have all this stuff. And I don't think people understand the amount of training that goes in before we can even hand that equipment out. Mm-hmm. Every officer has to go through training. I just went through patrol rifle retraining, and it was great. It was transitional training, transitioning from the rifle to your handgun back to the rifle. It's, misfeeds, all that kind of stuff, how to clear a weapon if something jams. I mean, just so much training you have to come into, and people, they just don't understand the amount. And we have 400 and, right now, 60 some officers that we have to get through that training. Mm-hmm. That's a lot of time. A lot of people pulling off the street to go to training, out of what they're regularly doing to get to training. We have to schedule that. Right now we have a full class and a staff of like 5 at the academy full time that are responsible for all the training for all of us to keep our certifications up, to make sure we're proficient in handguns and firearms and taser. It's just a lot.
Meantime, you've got one small department that on the surface, again, doesn't look like they
made the best decisions. But I'll wait.
But I mean, you got the cheap sheets chirping already, and I think that, to me, that's at least the big takeaway, especially as a member of the media. I haven't chirped about it yet because I just don't even feel like I have the knowledge to begin to chirp about it.
And I don't like to speak because I don't like to apologize. So I don't want to say I'm sorry because I spoke before I knew what the real story was. Yeah. On the surface, though, I will say right now it does not look like the right decisions were made. But were they made on a malicious level? Were they made on a self-preservation level? Were they made because they just don't have the adequate training or equipment? Because if you're sending me in with a handgun to a guy who has fully armed with a rifle and handguns and extra ammo, and all I have is what I carry, those are not good odds.
You're likely going to lose that battle. Yeah.
You're likely going to lose that battle. And you know what? And officer or not, some people are just not cut out to make those tough decisions on whether or not they're going to risk their life for that. I mean, you should have known that before but again, I'm not sure they've had situations like this, or they don't think it's never going to happen here.
Right, and I feel
it's never going to happen here.
It is a little unfair of you should have known that before. I know people say that, they like to say that too. Well, they shouldn't have been a police officer if they can't make that call or can't make that decision. We can all anticipate what we think we're going to do in a situation.
Absolutely.
But until you're actually in that situation, when you're staring down the barrel of an AK-47 and all you have on your hip is a 9mm.
Yeah, when those bullets are flying towards you, man, a lot goes out the window.
Goes out the window.
You really do. And that quote, when I said it, you sink to your level of training.
Yep.
I've been in that situation. I've been bullets flying at me, and man, it is not a good feeling at all. At all. And it's scary, and it feels like you're in slow motion. But you do what you do, and we handled it, and everybody was okay at the end. But it's not till after you think of things like, oh, wow, okay. And then right away, my overthinking mind's like, man, I should have done that, or I could have done that, or I could have done this. And it's a training moment. Each and every run, if you sit and think about it, is a training moment for yourself. And on my way to runs, when I was working the road on these, party armed calls, or, someone's armed here working in this call in, man, I'm running through my mind of what am I going to do? What am I going to do? If this happens, I can do this. If this happens, I'll do that. In your mind, I'm just constantly thinking about those things. And even when I go to a restaurant, or I go to a theater, or I go to wherever I'm going to relax, which I never relax, I'm looking at the exits. Okay, if this happens, how am I going to get people out of here? If this happens, how am I sitting? Where's my cover? Where's my concealment?
I learned that about you day one. You came in here and sat in the chair that you sit in because you can. My back's to the door.
Everything.
You can see everything.
And I do that most places. Unless I'm with other officers that I know have my back, then I'm a little more relaxed, and I can, or people. I know people too that carry, and they're very proficient. So I'll sit with my back to the door if I'm around people I trust. But if I'm not, and it's just me with my family, yeah, you bet your bottom dollar I'm watching. I'm watching everything. And I always feel bad when I'm with people because we're having conversations and I'm like, my head's moving around. Like I'm not, exits, like I'm detached from what they're saying to me, but I am not. I mean, sometimes that can come across as rude, but that's just who I am.
I would rather that, Sophia, than you not being on alert. I mean, I wish that you could relax. But I
do too. I think my brain would like it. My sleep pattern would really probably like it. And one day maybe I will. Probably not, but I might.
Okay, Sophia, let me just kind of circle back to this, and maybe we can kind of end on this point. Back to when it comes to see something, say something. When it comes to the ability to actually do that, I know we have some apps out there and that you can call 911, as we mentioned earlier. But for example, when you Google what to do in the state of Indiana in an active shooter situation, or how to report an active shooter, you're taken to an FBI website. And it's got this 52-page document. And yes, you're laughing.
I'm laughing. I'm like, oh,
it was published
the FBI.
21 years ago.
Yeah.
Right. And that's your guidance on handling, or how to handle an active shooter situation. And I've never called 911 for an active shooter situation. I don't know what that's like. I don't know what kind of response I'd even get. I also have never used the P3 app that Crime Stoppers promotes. I know we've talked about it a lot. I've heard that app can be a little bit cumbersome sometimes. So I guess get into the nitty gritty. I mean, what are we as a community supposed to do in a situation like this?
Okay, first and foremost, active shooter is a 911 call. There is no other place to put that. There's no, the P3 app is for...
Even suspicious activity with a firearm, would you call that?
Even suspicious activity with a firearm, 911 is going to be where you want to go. If you're still hard-pressed to not call 911 on that, please call our desk line at 427-1222. Yeah. But they're going to send you over to dispatch because that is anything with a gun, we're going to want to know about right away. And please articulate what's suspicious about that situation, because if you don't, it may limit how it goes in as a priority. So if, like I said, if it's the middle of summer and they're in a down, puffy, long trench coat, or have a ski mask on and going into a bank and with this long coat or something, we're going to want to know about that. Please articulate what makes it suspicious. Because, how we handle that moving forward is going to be determined by what the information that we have.
And that can be all anonymous that way, right?
It can be. Calling 911 can be. We prefer you don't. We're not going to, tell the person your name. But if we need to get more information from you, we need to have someone to call. Because if it turns into be something, then we need to have someone that, initially called so we can get more information if we need to, or clarify something if there's something a little bit off. So that is a 911 situation. And an active shooter is someone actively shooting.
Yes, okay.
Okay,
yeah.
So when someone's in a business and they've got a gun out and they're just throwing rounds down at people, that is an active shooter. That is a 911 emergency call. We will get to your call. We will get there. It's a priority one for us. Once that stops, though, and it could potentially turn into a barricaded subject if the person stays in the business, or we don't know. What happened at Ravenscroft turned into be where he turned the gun on himself. So it turned into be a suicide. We didn't know that, though. We still treated it as an active shooter situation because it was moments between the two. it's just everything's going to come down to those details, that information that we're getting. So please be very, very descriptive in what you're saying, descriptive on clothing if you can, physical descriptions, those kinds of things. We're going to want to know all that information because it's important to us and our safety as well, because those scenes are always so chaotic, and the gunman could be coming out in the rush of people exiting, and we wouldn't know unless we have that good description of that person.
Do you ever hear about, people who, quote, see something, say something, repercussions coming back on them?
I have not heard anything. I'm not going to say it won't ever happen, but if you are in good faith calling, you're not going to be in trouble. If you're maliciously trying to set someone up, as we've had things they're called swatting episodes, where people will call in like an active shooter or something going on and as a prank, it's, first of all, it's legal and not funny. There have been situations where people have died in those situations because we've had them here. We've had swatting incidents here, but luckily we've identified what it was before it got to that level.
Wow. But
there have been people in some jurisdictions who have died at the hands of police because misinformation was falsely spread about someone. And I think that started out as like a prank between video gamers and stuff. And then it just caught on the internet,
like the
and then
TikTok trend.
Yeah, and that's how it quickly spread. It was an internet social media thing, and then it just became kind of commonplace. And I think we haven't had one for a bit, but we're always looking out for those kinds of things. That's why I said the more information you have, the better off we're going to be, and the better off the situation will turn out.
Well, I have a feeling this topic isn't going to go away. I'm sure we'll revisit it again.
We will.
In future episodes here of Unholstered. But that's where we're at right now, because I know we got a lot of criticism for not talking about it. So there you go.
And we will. We'll talk about it more, certainly. When we get more information out, maybe we'll bring someone on. We'll bring Kevin Zelt back.
Yeah, let's bring him back.
And we'll talk about this and how we went from that Columbine shooting and the training up to where we are now, and how we keep that training at the forefront for us.
Let's do it. I know what's coming up next weekend. I mean, next weekend, you're really going to want to be tuned in. It's one of those topics. I mean, we say all the time that we talk about things that don't often get talked about when it comes to law enforcement. This topic really never gets talked about. Yeah. We're talking about cleanup after a death, whether that's a homicide or a suicide or just dying of natural causes, and the body's been in a home for 4 or 5 days.
Yeah,
in the middle of 100-degree heat. So we are talking cleanup after death next weekend on Unholstered. If you've missed any previous episodes of Unholstered, you can download us anywhere you download a podcast. Just search for Unholstered. Your town, your team, your topics. This is Unholstered.
Thanks for listening to Unholstered. Be sure to subscribe to us on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you listen. And remember, you can listen every Saturday morning at 10:30 on WOWO 1190 and 107.5 FM.
Podcasts by Federated Media.